The thunder rolled across the vast plains of Wyoming territory as Sarah Graves clutched her feverish 6-month-old daughter Emma to her chest, desperately seeking shelter from the punishing storm. The year was 1876, and she had never felt more alone in her 22 years of life. Rain poured mercilessly as Sarah spotted a dim light in the distance, her soaked cotton dress clinging to her trembling form. The abandoned homestead she'd been living in for the past month had finally collapsed under the weight of the storm, forcing her to flee with nothing but her sick child and the clothes on her back. "Hold on, Emma," she whispered, pressing chapped lips against her baby's burning forehead. "Just a little farther." The light grew stronger as she approached, revealing a modest cabin nestled against a small hill. Smoke curled from the stone chimney despite the late hour, promising warmth her child desperately needed. Sarah hesitated only a moment before climbing the 3 wooden steps to the porch and knocking with what little strength remained in her weary body. When the door swung open, she found herself staring into the most piercing blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a tall man with broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind. His dark brown hair was tousled, suggesting she'd roused him from sleep. "Please," Sarah gasped, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. "My baby's sick." The man's eyes moved from Sarah to the bundle in her arms. Without a word, he stepped aside, allowing her entrance into the warm cabin. "Name's Quinn Tanner," he said, closing the door against the raging storm. "Set yourself by the fire, madam." Sarah stumbled toward the hearth, where glowing embers cast dancing shadows across rough-hewn walls. Emma whimpered softly, her tiny face flushed with fever. "I'm Sarah Graves," she managed, sinking onto a wooden chair Quinn pulled forward. "This is Emma. We were staying at the old Peterson place about 3 miles east. The roof finally gave out tonight." Quinn nodded once, his expression inscrutable as he stoked the fire. "That place should have been torn down years ago. Peterson died during the winter of '72. "I didn't have much choice," Sarah replied, adjusting Emma in her arms. The baby's eyes remained closed, her breathing shallow and labored. Quinn disappeared briefly into what Sarah assumed was a bedroom, returning with a thick woolen blanket. "You're both soaked through. That won't help the little one's fever." He draped the blanket around Sarah's shoulders with unexpected gentleness. "I'll brew some willow bark tea, might bring the fever down." While Quinn busied himself at the small kitchen area, Sarah took in her surroundings. The cabin was simple but solid, with a table, 2 chairs, a bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes, and a single bed visible through the partially open bedroom door. A rifle hung above the fireplace, and various tools adorned the walls. It was clearly a bachelor's dwelling, yet surprisingly tidy. "How long has she been sick?" Quinn asked, setting a kettle on the cook stove. 3 days now," Sarah answered, fear evident in her voice. "Started with just a cough, but the fever came yesterday. I've been trying to keep her cool with wet cloths, but—" Her voice trailed off as tears threatened. Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "My sister's youngest had something similar last spring, scared us all half to death." He pulled a small tin from a shelf. "This tea helped, along with some honey for the cough." Sarah watched as he worked, his large, calloused hands moving with surprising dexterity. There was something reassuring about his quiet competence. "You have family nearby?" he asked without looking up. "No," Sarah replied simply. The full story was too painful to share with a stranger, no matter how kind. Her husband Thomas had been dead for 7 months now, shot during a bank robbery in Cheyenne where he'd been an innocent bystander. With no family and dwindling funds, she'd eventually found her way to the abandoned Peterson homestead, hoping to somehow make a life for herself and Emma. Quinn didn't press for details, bringing her a steaming cup of tea instead. "Once it cools a bit, try to get some into the baby. Best if you drink some too." "Thank you," Sarah whispered, gratitude washing over her. "I don't know what I would have done if—" "No need for that," Quinn cut her off gently. "Storm's getting worse. You'll stay here tonight, at least until the little one's fever breaks." Sarah nodded, too exhausted to argue even if she'd wanted to. Quinn pulled his chair closer to the fire and sat, his presence oddly comforting as she carefully administered small amounts of the cooling tea to Emma. As the night deepened, Emma's fever raged on. Sarah hummed softly, rocking her daughter as Quinn kept the fire burning steadily. He spoke little but moved with purpose, bringing fresh water and clean cloths for Sarah to bathe Emma's feverish skin. "You know your way around a sick child," Sarah observed during one of these exchanges. A shadow passed over Quinn's face. "Had 4 younger siblings. Our ma died when I was 16, learned what I had to." Sarah's heart constricted at the simple statement and all it implied. "Where are they now?" "Sisters married and living in Colorado, brothers working the railroads back east." His gaze flickered to Emma. "Been on my own about 5 years now." Hours passed in this manner, with Quinn leaving only briefly to check his livestock in the nearby barn. Each time he returned, he brought fresh firewood and quiet determination. Near midnight, Emma's fever spiked dangerously. The baby's tiny body shuddered with each labored breath, and Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "She's getting worse," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "I can't lose her, I can't." Quinn was beside them in an instant. Without asking permission, he placed his hand on Emma's forehead, his brow furrowing with concern. "I've seen this before," he said after a moment. "We need to break the fever now." He moved to a trunk in the corner, pulling out a small brown bottle. "My ma swore by this mixture. Old Cherokee woman taught her how to make it." Sarah hesitated only briefly before accepting the medicine. At this point, she would try anything. Under Quinn's guidance, she administered a few drops to Emma, then continued bathing her with cool cloths. Quinn didn't return to his chair. Instead, he sat beside Sarah on the small bench, his solid presence a silent comfort as they both watched over the struggling infant. "Tell me about her," he said softly after a long silence. Sarah glanced up, surprised. "Emma," Quinn nodded, his eyes never leaving the baby's flushed face. "She was born during a snowstorm," Sarah began, a small smile touching her lips despite her fear. "Stubbornest baby the midwife said she'd ever delivered, already has opinions about everything," her voice caught. "She laughs like sunshine, Mr. Tanner, just pure sunshine." Quinn's expression softened. "Quinn, please, and she sounds like a fighter." "She is," Sarah whispered, pressing her lips to Emma's forehead. As the night wore on, Sarah's exhaustion became overwhelming. Her head nodded forward several times before Quinn gently touched her arm. "You need rest," he said firmly. "I'll watch over her." Sarah started to protest, but Quinn cut her off. "I promise I'll wake you if anything changes. You're no good to her if you collapse." Reluctantly, Sarah allowed Quinn to take Emma into his arms. The contrast was striking, the tiny infant cradled against his broad chest, yet he held her with remarkable tenderness. "Just for a little while," Sarah conceded, settling more comfortably on the bench. She meant to close her eyes for only a moment, but exhaustion claimed her immediately. When Sarah awoke, pale dawn light was filtering through the cabin's single window. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then she bolted upright, panic seizing her heart. "Emma, she's right here." Quinn's deep voice drew her attention. He was still in the same position, her daughter cradled carefully in his arms. The fire had burned low, but the cabin remained warm. Sarah rushed to them, her heart in her throat. When she touched Emma's forehead, she nearly collapsed with relief. The burning heat had subsided to a mild warmth. "Her fever broke about 2 hours ago," Quinn explained, his voice rough with fatigue. "She's been sleeping peacefully since." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she gently took Emma from him. The baby stirred slightly but didn't wake, her breathing deep and even. "You sat with her all night," Sarah whispered, overwhelmed by this stranger's kindness. Quinn shrugged, rolling his stiff shoulders. "Gave my word, didn't I?" "Thank you," Sarah said, the simple phrase wholly inadequate for what she felt. Quinn nodded once, then rose to his feet. "I'll make us some breakfast. You both need to get your strength back." As he moved around the kitchen area, Sarah noticed the stiffness in his movements and the dark circles under his eyes. He had truly sat vigil all night, watching over her child while she slept. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world. Sunlight streamed through the window as Quinn prepared a simple meal of cornmeal mush, sweetened with molasses and strong black coffee. They ate in companionable silence, interrupted only when Emma finally awoke, her cry weaker than normal but unmistakably demanding. "Sounds like someone's feeling better," Quinn commented, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. Sarah fed Emma, relief flooding through her as the baby nursed hungrily. When Emma finished, her blue eyes opened fully for the first time since the fever had taken hold, focusing with interest on Quinn's face. "She likes you," Sarah observed. Quinn's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught a flicker of something in his eyes, pleasure perhaps, or remembered pain. "Where will you go now?" he asked, changing the subject. The question brought Sarah crashing back to reality. The Peterson homestead was uninhabitable, and she had nowhere else to go, no money to speak of, and a recovering infant to care for. "I don't know," she admitted, fear creeping back into her voice. Quinn studied her for a long moment. "There's work to be had at the Travis Ranch about 10 miles west. Old Mrs. Travis has been looking for household help since her daughter married last fall." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. "You think she'd hire me? With Emma?" Mrs. Travis raised 7 children of her own. "She'd likely welcome another little one around." Quinn hesitated, then added, "I could take you there once the baby's stronger. Roads will be muddy for a day or two after that storm." The offer was more than generous, and Sarah knew it. "I couldn't impose any further." "It's no imposition," Quinn interrupted. "I deliver supplies to the Travis Ranch regular, due there in a few days anyway." Sarah wanted to refuse, to somehow maintain her independence, but Emma's needs had to come first. "That's very kind of you," she finally said. Quinn nodded, the matter settled. "You'll both stay here until then. The little one needs time to recover properly." The next 3 days passed in a strange, peaceful rhythm. Emma's strength returned quickly, and soon she was cooing and reaching for anything within her grasp, including Quinn's fingers whenever he came near. Sarah helped with cooking and cleaning, determined to earn their keep. She learned that Quinn had come west after the war between the states, working first as a ranch hand before saving enough to purchase his modest property 5 years ago. He raised horses, mostly quarter horses, for ranch work, and did occasional freight hauling between settlements. "Not getting rich," he told her as they shared an evening meal, "but I answer to no one, and that's worth something." Sarah found herself drawn to his quiet strength and unassuming kindness. He never asked about her past, but gradually she found herself sharing pieces of it: her childhood in Ohio, her marriage to Thomas, the devastating day she'd become a widow. "Thomas was a good man," she said softly on their 3rd evening together. "He was so excited about becoming a father." "Never even got to meet Emma." Quinn listened without judgment, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "He'd be proud of how you're raising her," he said simply. On the morning they were to leave for the Travis Ranch, Sarah felt an unexpected reluctance. Emma was fully recovered, babbling happily in the makeshift cradle Quinn had fashioned from a wooden crate padded with blankets. "Weather's clear," Quinn announced after returning from tending his horses. "Should reach the Travis place by mid-afternoon." Sarah nodded, gathering the few belongings they'd salvaged from the Peterson homestead during a brief visit the day before. Quinn had insisted on accompanying her, his expression grim as he'd surveyed the collapsed roof and water damage. "Not much worth saving," he'd commented, helping her collect the bundle of clothing and the small wooden box containing her wedding ring and a daguerreotype of Thomas. Now, as Quinn loaded his wagon with supplies for the Travis Ranch, Sarah found herself lingering in the cabin that had briefly been their sanctuary. "Ready?" Quinn asked from the doorway. Sarah nodded, lifting Emma into her arms. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Something flickered in Quinn's eyes, but he merely nodded. "We should get moving." The journey to the Travis Ranch was pleasant, the spring landscape vibrant with wildflowers after the recent rain. Quinn pointed out landmarks along the way, his deep voice a soothing counterpoint to the steady clop of the horses' hooves. "That ridge there marks the northern boundary of Travis land," he explained as they crested a small hill. Old Man Travis started with nothing but 100 acres and built it into one of the biggest spreads in the territory. Sarah listened attentively, trying to focus on her future rather than the growing sense of loss she felt as they moved farther from Quinn's cabin. The Travis Ranch was impressive, a large main house with several outbuildings and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Mrs. Abigail Travis was a formidable woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "So you're the widow Graves," she said, after Quinn made introductions. Her gaze softened slightly as it fell on Emma. And this little one is why you're late with my supplies, Quinn Tanner. Quinn actually looked abashed. She was sick, Mrs. Travis, bad fever. The older woman nodded, her assessment of Sarah apparently complete. Well, I need help with cooking, cleaning, and mending. The men work hard and eat accordingly. Think you can handle that? Yes, madam, Sarah answered firmly. There's a room off the kitchen, small, but it'll fit you and the baby. Mrs. Travis glanced at Quinn. You staying for supper or heading back before dark? Quinn hesitated, his eyes meeting Sarah's briefly. Best head back, he finally said. Got horses that need tending. Sarah felt a sharp pang of disappointment but forced a smile. Thank you again for your help, Quinn. He nodded stiffly. I'll bring the rest of your things from the wagon. After he'd carried in Sarah's meager possessions, Quinn prepared to depart. Sarah followed him outside, Emma on her hip, watching as he checked the wagon harness. Will you? She began, then faltered. What right did she have to ask anything more of this man? Quinn looked up, waiting. Will you visit sometime? Sarah finally asked. Emma would like to see you again. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. I deliver supplies here the first Monday of each month. It wasn't much, but it was something. Sarah nodded, trying to hide her relief. We'll look forward to it. Quinn tipped his hat and climbed onto the wagon seat. Without another word, he flicked the reins and set the horses in motion, not looking back as the wagon rolled down the lane. Sarah watched until he disappeared from view, an inexplicable emptiness settling in her chest. Life at the Travis ranch quickly fell into a routine. Sarah rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent her days cleaning, washing, and mending, and collapsed into exhausted sleep each night. Mrs. Travis proved to be demanding but fair, and she had a surprising soft spot for Emma, often taking the baby while Sarah tackled heavier chores. Never had grandbabies nearby, the older woman explained gruffly when Sarah expressed gratitude. My daughters all married men from back east. April turned to May, and Sarah found herself watching the road on the first Monday of the month. When Quinn's wagon appeared, her heart leapt embarrassingly in her chest. He nodded politely when he saw her, unloading supplies with the same quiet efficiency he showed in everything. When the work was done, Mrs. Travis insisted he stay for dinner. How are the horses? Sarah asked as they sat at the kitchen table, the ranch hands having already eaten and returned to their work. Doing well, Quinn replied. Got a new foal last week, strong little filly. And you? Are you well? His eyes met hers briefly. Getting by. After that first visit, Sarah found herself counting days until the first Monday of each month. Quinn never stayed long, just enough time to deliver supplies, share a meal, and perhaps hold Emma for a few minutes before departing. Emma, now 7 months old, clearly remembered him. She would squeal with delight when she saw him, reaching out with chubby hands until he took her, looking both pleased and uncomfortable with her obvious affection. She misses you, Sarah told him during his June visit as Emma babbled happily in his arms. Quinn's expression remained unreadable, but his hold on the baby tightened slightly. Growing fast, was all he said. By July, Sarah had saved enough from her wages to consider her future more carefully. Mrs. Travis paid her fairly, providing room and board plus a small salary. But living in someone else's home, no matter how decent the arrangement, wasn't what she wanted long-term. There's a small place for sale, Mrs. Travis mentioned one evening as they sat on the porch shelling peas. About 3 miles east of here. Nothing fancy, but the roof's solid and there's good water. Previous owner moved to Oregon. Sarah's pulse quickened. How much are they asking, Mrs. Travis named a figure that was substantial but not entirely out of reach, especially if Sarah continued working through the winter. Just something to think about, the older woman added, her sharp eyes assessing Sarah's reaction. When Quinn arrived the following Monday, Sarah found herself telling him about the property. I know it's ambitious, she finished uncertainly, but I want Emma to have a real home someday. Quinn was silent for a long moment. It's the old Miller place, Sarah nodded, surprised. You know it. Helped Miller put up that barn 5 years back. Quinn seemed to be considering something. It's good land, house needs work, but the structure's sound. His approval bolstered Sarah's confidence. I thought perhaps by next spring if I save carefully. Quinn nodded thoughtfully. Miller was asking too much last I heard. Property's been empty nearly 8 months now. He might take less. Hope flared in Sarah's chest. Do you really think so? Worth asking. Quinn's gaze lingered on Emma, who was attempting to crawl across the kitchen floor. Little one will need space to grow. 2 days later, Sarah was startled to see Quinn's wagon approaching the ranch, well ahead of his next scheduled delivery. Miller's agreed to sell for 30% less than his asking price, he announced without preamble when Sarah met him at the door. But only if you can put down half by the end of summer. Sarah stared at him in shock. You spoke to him. How did you even know where to find him? Ran into his brother in town, Quinn replied, as if negotiating real estate deals for her was perfectly normal. Sent a telegraph to Oregon. I don't know what to say, Sarah stammered. Even at the reduced price, she would need to save every penny for months to make the down payment. Quinn shifted uncomfortably. There's more. I told him I'd put up the remaining half as a loan. You can repay me when you're able. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Quinn, I can't accept, it's just a loan, he interrupted firmly, with interest if that makes you feel better. But why would you do this? Sarah asked, genuinely confused by his generosity. Quinn's eyes flickered to Emma, who was watching them intently from her blanket on the porch. Everyone deserves a chance at a real home, he said quietly. There was something in his voice, a longing Sarah recognized because she felt it herself. In that moment, standing in the golden July sunlight with her daughter nearby and this good, quiet man offering her a future, Sarah realized what had been growing in her heart these past months. Come see the property with me, she said impulsively, before we make any decisions. Quinn hesitated, then nodded. I could take you tomorrow if Mrs. Travis can spare you. The next day, they rode to the Miller property in Quinn's wagon, Emma securely nestled between them. The small farmhouse came into view as they crested a gentle hill, a simple one-story structure with a front porch and a nearby barn. Needs paint and some new shingles, Quinn observed as they approached. But the foundation's solid. They explored the property together, Quinn pointing out both problems and potential. The house had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a good cookstove and a small parlor. The barn could house several animals and there was a chicken coop in need of repair. 5 acres cleared for planting, Quinn noted as they walked the boundaries. Good well water, enough to get started at least. Sarah watched as he assessed the property with a practiced eye, offering practical suggestions for improvements and repairs. Emma was content in his arms, tugging occasionally at his shirt collar with delighted giggles. They looked like a family. The thought struck Sarah with such force that she stopped walking, overwhelmed by the vision of what could be. Quinn turned, noticing her stillness. Something wrong. Sarah shook her head, unable to articulate the tangle of emotions in her chest. Just thinking, they returned to the Travis ranch by mid-afternoon, having thoroughly explored the Miller property. As Quinn prepared to leave, Sarah gathered her courage. Quinn, she began, then faltered. How could she express what she was feeling without risking the friendship they'd built? He waited, his blue eyes watchful. I was wondering, Sarah finally continued, why you're helping me this way. The truth, please. Quinn's expression remained carefully neutral, but Sarah saw tension in the set of his shoulders. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. When I found my place, he said eventually, his voice low, I had no one, built everything alone, spent many nights with just silence for company. His eyes moved to Emma, who was playing nearby. No child should grow up without a proper home, and no woman should have to face the world alone if she doesn't have to. Is that all? Sarah pressed gently. Quinn's gaze returned to her face, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. What else would there be? Sarah took a deep breath. Perhaps the same reason I look forward to the first Monday of every month as if it were Christmas morning. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by Emma's soft babbling. Sarah, Quinn finally said, her name sounding different in his deep voice, I'm not a man of many words. I've noticed, she replied with a small smile, the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. What I mean to say is, I've grown fond of you, both of you, more than fond. He cleared his throat. But I wouldn't presume, Sarah interrupted softly. Please. Quinn's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely uncertain. You have a chance at that property, a fresh start. I wouldn't want you to feel obligated because of my help. It's not obligation I feel when I think of you, Sarah assured him, taking a step closer. It hasn't been for some time now. Something shifted in Quinn's expression, hope breaking through his careful reserve. Slowly, as if giving her every chance to step away, he reached out to touch her cheek. "I never expected to find someone like you," he admitted quietly. "Didn't think I was meant for family life." Sarah leaned into his touch. "Emma and I have changed your mind." A real smile transformed his weathered face. "From the first night when her fever broke and she opened those big eyes. And then watching you, how strong you are." He shook his head. "Yes, you've changed my mind about a great many things." On an August morning 3 weeks later, Sarah Graves became Sarah Tanner in a simple ceremony at the local church. Mrs. Travis hosted a modest celebration afterward, clearly pleased with the match despite losing her housekeeper. "About time that boy found someone," she told Sarah when Quinn was occupied with some of the ranch hands. "Been watching him circle around you like a cautious wolf since spring." By September, they had moved into the Miller property, now the Tanner farm. Quinn had spent every available moment making repairs and improvements, often working late into the evening by lantern light. Sarah had sewn curtains for the windows and planted a small kitchen garden, determined to make the house a home before winter arrived. One evening, as the first chill of autumn crept across the land, Sarah sat on the porch with Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. Quinn joined her after finishing his chores, settling into the chair beside hers with a contented sigh. "Thinking about that night?" he asked, noticing her reflective expression. Sarah nodded. "How frightened I was, how sick Emma was, and how you opened your door to us." Quinn reached over to take her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "Best decision I ever made." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, Emma nestled between them. "Do you remember sitting up all night?" Her fever finally broke just before dawn. "I remember everything about that night," Quinn replied softly. "How brave you were, how small she looked in my arms, how right it felt somehow, the three of us together." Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand. "I was so afraid of losing her." "I was afraid of losing both of you before I'd even found you," Quinn admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Watching her fever break, seeing you sleeping from exhaustion, I knew then I wanted to protect you both always." Emma stirred in Sarah's arms, her tiny hand reaching out in sleep. Quinn extended his finger, smiling as the baby grasped it instinctively. "We have a good life ahead, don't we?" Sarah whispered. Quinn nodded, his eyes reflecting the setting sun. "Better than good," he promised. "We've got a home, healthy land, and each other, everything that matters." As darkness settled over their new home, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here: a desperate night, a feverish baby, and a quiet cowboy who had sat beside them until morning came. Sometimes the worst storms, she reflected, led to the most beautiful dawns.